Freedom, man. That's what it's all about. You've got to groove on freedom, like the good book says.
Welcome. You are listening to What on Earth is Happening. This show will discuss the topics of human consciousness, mind control, natural law, the occult, and all issues that affect the freedom of the people of Earth. What on Earth is Happening will endeavor to shine light upon the darkness of our world and to offer empowering solutions to the problems we face as humanity approaches its critical moment of choice. And now, here is your host, Mark Passio.
Welcome one and all, you're listening to What on Earth is Happening here on the Republic Broadcasting Radio Network. I'm your host, Mark Passio. My website, whatonearthishappening.com. Today is Saturday, July 12th, 2014. We have a great show lined up for you here today. This show is live every Saturday evening from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. Eastern Time. That's 9 p.m. to midnight Central. And tonight on What on Earth is Happening, we're going to be getting into more on the theory of interference with humanity that took place in our ancient past as a result of interference by non-human entities. I call this cosmic abandonment, and I'll be continuing the cosmic abandonment presentation, breaking it down in depth and talking about the connection between the interference theory of human origins and the current human condition. That'll be coming up on tonight's show. I will be taking calls in the third hour of the show tonight. Haven't been doing calls over the last couple of shows, been really focusing on the presentation material. I figure it's time to take some calls for the last hour of the show tonight. So if you want to join us in the last hour, the call-in number to join us is 800-313-9443. Once again, the call-in number to join us in the third hour. You can get in the call queue early if you wish. 800-313-9443. A couple of quick event announcements before we begin the material for tonight. I will be giving an all-day seminar in Manchester, Connecticut on Saturday, October 4th, 2014, from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. It's a live, one-of-a-kind, all-day seminar, and it's called Demystifying the Occult. This is presented by Pattern Recognition Time and Art Capozzi, and Art will be giving a small preliminary presentation at the beginning of the day. The doors will open around 9 a.m. We'll probably get started in by no later than 9:30, maybe even a little bit earlier. And I'll be doing a morning session. We'll be taking a break for lunch. An afternoon session. We'll be taking a break for dinner, and then hopefully we'll have time for an extended question and answer session in the evening session. This will be taking place at the Manchester History Center at 175 Pine Street in Manchester, Connecticut, 06040. Free parking is available at the Manchester History Center for those coming in from out of town. Here's the brief description. Mark Passio, the no-nonsense teacher of streetwise spirituality, will take his guests on a journey of exploration, examining the world of the occult and its symbols. What exactly is the occult? Why should you know about it? What kind of knowledge comprises the occult? Who possesses such knowledge and how do they use it? How is occultism different from mysticism? What can the secret language of symbolism communicate? How is symbolism being used in our everyday lives? This and much more will be discussed in this all-day seminar. In the last part of the seminar, I will also be breaking down a lot of the symbolism of the major arcana of the tarot. So this is a presentation you won't want to miss. If you're anywhere near Manchester, Connecticut, or if you want to come in from out of town, that's great too. Advance tickets are only a $25 donation. You could send a personal check or money order payable to Arthur Capozzi, 500 Monroe Turnpike, Suite 142, Monroe, Connecticut, 06468. Or you can purchase tickets at the door for a $30 cash donation. Once again, Demystifying the Occult, a live all-day seminar, Saturday, October 4th, 2014, 9 o'clock a.m. start time. Really looking forward to it. Also, another brief event announcement. Truth, Freedom, Prosperity will host its free documentary film screening and discussion evening, as always on the third Thursday of every month at 7 o'clock p.m. at the Guerin Recreation Center at 16th and Jackson Streets in Philadelphia. This will be taking place this coming Thursday, July 17th. The documentary film for this Thursday evening is State of Mind, The Psychology of Control, a really, really great documentary on mind control and social engineering. Here's the brief description. Are we controlled? To what extent and by whom? What does it mean for humanity's future? State of Mind digs deeply into the sources to reveal that much of what we believe to be truth has been deception, deliberately implanted into our consciousness to erect tyranny. State of Mind examines the science that has evolved over generations to keep us firmly in place and maintain the status quo so that dictators, power brokers, and corporate puppeteers may profit from our ignorance. From the anvil of compulsory schooling to media and entertainment, we are kept in perpetual bondage to the ideas that shape our actions. State of Mind delves into the abyss to bring light to the manipulation and reveal the true agendas at work. From the ancient roots of the control of human behavior to its maturity in the mind control experiments of intelligence agencies, State of Mind reveals a plan for the future that drives home the dreadful price of our ignorance. Will we choose our own paths or have one selected for us? State of Mind unveils the answers that may decide whether humankind will fulfill its destiny or be forever enslaved. This is a really powerful documentary film that we have shown before as part of the free documentary screening and discussion evenings that we host. But again, we're rerunning some of the films that we thought were especially good and that people who are new to this group really need to see again, and people who are even veteran members of the group need to take these films and show them to other people in their friendship circle and in their families, so that this information can really sink in. So once again, Thursday, July 17th at the Guerin Recreation Center, 1600 Jackson Street. There is free parking, free fenced-in parking on premises. You could bring your own food and drink, and it's free to attend. There is a small donation that we have to give to the group has to give to the Guerin Center in order to rent the room. So if you can give a small monetary donation, it is appreciated but not required. Come on out on this Thursday at the Guerin Center, and it'll be an educational evening. So those are the two brief event announcements that I had. I also want to mention that, as always, there is a support donation button on the whatonearthishappening.com website. If you feel that you've gained value from the information that I've presented and shared on this radio show and podcast and on my website through my videos, you could feel free to make a voluntary donation to help support my work so that it can continue. So with that having been said, let's get into the topic for this evening, which once again is cosmic abandonment and the cosmic abandonment presentation that I've been going over for many weeks. So if you're new to this particular material, you might want to go back and listen to it from the beginning where I started covering this information. But as always, I always recommend that people go back to podcast number 1 and start from there, because this information, of course, is a very huge tapestry that has prerequisite knowledge that is part of it. And if you don't understand the stuff that's built upon early on in the podcast, this information is going to not really make much sense to you because it has prerequisite knowledge that you need to understand first. That's why I always recommend people to approach the What on Earth is Happening radio series and podcast in a linear progression, starting from number 1 and moving forward at your own pace. Those podcasts, of course, are archived at the whatonearthishappening.com website in the podcast section. So I want to direct everybody's attention to the whatonearthishappening.com radio page, the radio show page. As always, underneath the player, there are images for tonight's show. You could see that image 1 and 2 were the flyers, one for the Connecticut seminar that I'm doing in October, and one for the free documentary screening night in Philadelphia this coming Thursday. After that, you'll see Cosmic Abandonment Slides, Part 1 and 2. We've been going through these for the last few weeks, and we will continue to go through these for the next several. Last week, I left off at image number 53, and we were talking about, essentially, that it was a crime punishable by death to depict the beings that came here in our ancient past and genetically manipulated us according to their true forms.
You know the day destroys the night, night divides the day. Try to run, try to hide, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side, yeah.
Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening here on RBN. I'm your host, Mark Passio. My website, whatonearthishappening.com. As I was saying before the break, we were going through the Cosmic Abandonment presentation, and we got, I guess, about halfway through the first part of the slides. And we're going to pick it up from slide number 53 this evening. And we were talking about, we ended up talking about last week how the quote-unquote gods, these beings that came here and genetically manipulated our species, and as always, whenever I use that term gods, I'm putting it in double quotes. Please do not think that I'm likening these beings to any type of gods or true supernatural entities that, should be revered in any way. These were nothing of the kind, and I, as I've said already, I think that they are simply flesh and blood beings just like us that think that they were gods and, tried to act that role because of their advanced technology and, wanting to be basically worshipped by what they considered to be a lesser species that they had made. The term is simply, applicable to how the ancient people would have seen these beings because of their advanced technologies and ability to control them. And it should not be seen as any kind of, veneration that I'm attributing to these beings. I'm wrapping it in double quotes, and it is a lowercase g. Please make note of that. As we were saying last week, these beings would have completely forbidden anyone to show their image in how they actually looked. And this is because after the interbreeding happened between these beings and their creation, the early Mark I variant of humanity, I guess you could say, they no longer were directly administrating things here on the earth. They were allowing the beings that had resulted as a result of the interbreeding to be their administrators. These were known or referred to in the ancient world as the demigods or the men of renown, the giants, the Nephilim, the biblical texts call them. So these would have been literal alien-human hybrids that resulted in the breeding between the original beings, the original non-human beings that came here that the Sumerians referred to as the Anunnaki, those who from the heavens came to the earth, and their own creation, the early human beings. So these beings were kind of the intercessors between humanity and the quote-unquote gods, who essentially ran this planet from off-world, from probably some type of way stations or space stations, as we would refer to them as. So that's where the notion of gods being in the sky came from, and their administrators, their priest class, remaining here on the earth. And this was done, again, we talked about this last week, because these Nephilim beings or giants were referred to as the fallen because of their fallen genetic status as a result of the inbreeding with the, as the gods saw it, much lower level primitive human beings. So they were considered to have a fallen genome, a fallen variant of their DNA. And therefore they could not be taken back to their home world with them in the heavens. Therefore they were considered fallen ones, or fallen angels, you might call them. Okay? But they were certainly beings who were fallen from their original home in space. So again, they wanted to take advantage of this blending between themselves and human beings, which would have obscured some of their actual genetic and physical characteristics and traits in the way of differences. And the offspring between them and human beings probably would have looked like certainly a cross between them. And as they continued to breed with human beings, that difference would have gotten less and less, and they would have looked more like human beings and been able to integrate more easily into human society without being overtly challenged, because they were clearly different looking than humans. And when human beings see people who are completely different looking from them attempting to rule over them, there would probably be a much more higher probability to have physical rebellion against that type of slavery. But if they integrated the demigod species into them with the idea of the divine right to rule over the humans because of their superior bloodline and their connection to the gods of old, then a more covert methodology of control could be erected, in which the human beings would willfully go along with it, because they looked at this as some kind of a divine appointing from these gods that they didn't see in their short lifetimes in many cases. And those who did ever see them thought that they were immortal because of their extremely long lifespans. We talked about this a couple of weeks back. So again, we're talking about their countenances, their actual images would have been forbidden and punishable by death to be recorded and communicated to other people. This, of course, plays into the advantage of the controllers, because they could essentially be seen as anything, as actual supernatural entities, that were literally of magical origin or divine origin, instead of actual flesh and blood creatures, which they were. So the early humans essentially came up with a pretty clever way of depicting these beings without actually drawing them how they actually looked. And what they did was they, again, ascribed different motifs when they were drawing them. They gave them fish scales or very large accoutrements on the head that made their heads look very enlarged, but it was done in the way of headdresses. Or they depicted them as winged creatures, or creatures with a lot of feathers, like birds. So you saw them depicted as fish creatures, bird creatures, and probably very often as serpent beings, okay, because of the look of their skin, which we talked about last week as well. And which I said that the reason that they depicted this feathery-like skin or scaly skin like a fish or a serpent is because more likely than not, their skin may have looked like our elbows or knees all over their body. It was something that had a lot of ridges and looked more like something like we might see on a surface of a snake or a lizard. And this is where this idea that these were reptilian beings or serpent beings came out of, because of the look of their skin. So if we look at the depictions right here on slide number 53, we'll see, again, an Assyrian god, Sargon, depicted as a fish god. And again, these beings came from the sea in many cases, not only the sky, but the sea, because their craft were often witnessed coming not only from deep space, but from literally under the sea. Their crafts could travel under the ocean. And I said at the end of last week's show that I believe that they had bases underwater and probably still do, possibly to this day. So you'll also notice that in all of these different traditions, even though they come from different traditions, Akkadian, Sumerian, Babylonian, etc., largely the same parent culture, they depict the same basic actions taking place here. A god depicted as a winged creature or a fish creature or a bird creature, okay, carrying a conical shaped object, and then he has some sort of a bag or a box that he is carrying with him. We'll pick it up from this slide on the other side of the break. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to What on Earth is Happening. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening. We're continuing with the cosmic abandonment presentation, talking about how the ancient peoples depicted the gods because their direct countenances were forbidden to be depicted, and that was something that was punishable by death in the ancient world. On slide 53, we saw how the ancients depicted some of them, depicting them as beings that could fly through the air, hence bird-like entities, or beings with wings, or entities that could traverse the seas easily and therefore depicted as fish people. Also, you had the feathers and the scales of the fish playing a direct reference to the type of skin that these beings were said to have had. In these images, they're all depicted, regardless of the culture that is portraying them, as holding the pine cone. And this represented a high level of knowledge, understanding how things in the physical world and the spiritual dimensions worked as well. And the pine cone to this day is still a high level of spiritual, representative of a high level of spiritual knowledge, even though those who really use it don't really have that level of enlightenment. They think that they do, and they tell other people that they do, but they're not the real enlightened ones. They would refer to themselves as such, but nothing could be further from the truth. It's more of just a symbol of holding power, and holding power over others. That's really what that symbol has come to be representative of, a symbol of authority, and hence you see it on a lot of ancient temples, and certainly on the Vatican today. There's actually an entire court that is erected to pay homage to the pine cone, which is representative of the pineal gland, or the third eye, as the ancients referred to the pineal gland. So in slide number 54, we could see some other depictions of these beings by our ancient human ancestors, and here you have another Assyrian drawing on the left here of a king, and quote-unquote a god, a king, priest / intermediary between the gods and human beings, again depicted as a half-man, half-bird creature capable of flight, with certain energetic weapons, and of course with feathers. In the middle you have the Babylonian goddess Inanna, again holding some type of a technology in her hands, and depicted with owls, which is another symbol of the quote-unquote gods, or the elite, the illuminated ones, as they call themselves, a symbol of ancient knowledge, a symbol of a bird of prey, again a predatory bird-like creature capable of flight that can see its prey at night from an overhead position, where the prey cannot see it in darkness. She's also standing on lion cubs. This is always a symbol of knowledge, of high-level knowledge. You see this in the ancient Eastern traditions, particularly the Chinese tradition. The temple dogs always holding the cub underneath the paw. It's representative of high-level spiritual knowledge or wisdom. Again, a depiction that the ancients would have ascribed to these beings because they thought that they were like gods because of their high level of technology. And they constantly played up this angle that they were our gods because they physically created our species, which did not exist previously, and they provided for our species, and they administrated our species on a day-to-day basis. Again, it's just a term or a label. I don't want anybody thinking that I somehow ascribe the characteristics of God to these beings, because nothing could be farther from the truth. I want to continuously re-emphasize that so that people don't get that idea. Because, again, just a brief aside here, there's this dynamic that goes on in human beings where they hear what they want to hear. They don't hear what I'm actually saying. They hear what they want to hear. So they hear me say the word gods as being a word attributed to these beings, and then they say, Mark Passio is telling us that these are our gods. I said no such thing. I said this is how they were looked at by these ancient people who didn't know any better in many cases, and who were under their ruthless and brutal oppression from the time that we were created. I've said over and over again, I don't really think that these beings were the gods of anything except a sewer that they themselves created. Okay? And there's nothing close to similar about the true God of creation to these beings that I'm referring to. Nothing could be more completely dissimilar than comparing these two entities. The God of creation, the force of creation, the underlying force of intelligence inherent to everything, and these demented, in many cases, completely imbalanced beings that wanted to play God. Okay? I don't know how much more clear I can make that, but if people still want to, run with the notion and hear things that they want to hear, then fine, so be it. Okay? I don't know how much more clear I can make that. But going back to the point of their depictions by the ancient humans, again, you often saw them, you see this here, this motif repeated again, with them literally being portrayed as chimera-type beings, as a blending between humans and animals. Hence, you have a literal blending here in the last two imagery of the goddess Inanna, who was actually a physical being depicted in the ancient world and in the texts, who interacted with human beings. And and of course there is a symbolic side to this as well, where it is representative of a goddess tradition, representing wisdom and care and nurturing, etc. And the feminine aspects of the human human characteristics, which we've gone into in the past. But regarding these actual entities, these actual beings that came here and created us, you could see how now the humans were depicting them as a cross species between birds or fish and human beings. Hence, in this middle image, which is, I believe, Babylonian or Sumerian, and the middle image is Sumerian, and the image on the right, I believe, is Babylonian. You have a blending, an actual morphing between a bird-like being in the middle image with Inanna, and then she has the claws, the talons of the birds on her feet, of the owl on her feet. And then on the image on the right-hand side, this is, I believe it's, not sure of the entity, but I think it's Dagon. I could be incorrect about that, which is a Babylonian water god, depicted as a fish. Again, we're going to see this theme repeated with the large headdress. Okay, and we'll get into that on the other side of the break. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. More to come.
You still have like 2 minutes.
So I'm sorry. I thought I heard music coming in on the headphones. So sorry about that, folks. Little technical glitch there. It might have been some interference coming in through my headphones. We'll continue to the next slide. So let's move on to slide number 55, where we see these beings depicted as serpents. Okay, and here in the Egyptian tradition, in their stone carvings, you see the pharaoh Tutankhamun there on the left and Akhenaten on the right, And these pharaonic demigods were depicted as snakes, as serpents. Literally, the headdress is like the head of a cobra. And you see the cobra, or the serpent, up on top of the headdress at the position of the third eye. Okay, and you can see the non-human looking eyes, a continuously repeated motif in the Egyptian tradition and in the Egyptian symbology as well. So these beings were, again, depicted as snake-like beings or serpent-like beings. Again, probably because of the way their skin actually appeared, but it was also a reference to higher level knowledge. Okay, and you again, and not so much on the left there with Tutankhamun, but on the right with Akhenaten, you see the extremely elongated headdress covering what would appear to be an extremely elongated skull, which we're going to talk about in a few moments. And then in the middle, coming out of that skull, right over the third eye area, would have been the serpent, the cobra, coming out of the middle of the headdress. Okay, so here we see them depicted as serpent beings, and this is the cult of the serpent is completely revered throughout the ancient world, and it stretches back as far as the earliest human civilizations that we even have history records accounting for, going back to Ur and pre-Sumerian culture, all the way into the Indus Valley traditions and the Middle Eastern traditions as well. Of course, culminating in Egypt, and then, of course, after Egypt was eventually diminished, the Egyptian power culture was eventually diminished, it was absorbed into the Roman Empire. So this serpent cult it goes down through the generations, from the earliest human beings right into the present day, where we still see constant allusions and references to snake-like beings and serpent-type symbolism. Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening. I'm your host, Mark Passio. Got cut off a little bit before the last break. I apologize. I'm having a little bit of difficulty hearing the break music coming in through my headphones. Hopefully we'll get that worked out. Not a big deal. We were on slide number 56. I was beginning to talk about some of the archaeological artifacts that have been discovered that depict, or where humans attempted to depict some of these beings perhaps in a way more similar to how they may have actually appeared to them in some sort of a crude fashion. These images on slide 56 are from the Ubaid culture, U-B-I-A-D, UBAID, I'm sorry. The Ubaid culture was actually pre-Sumerian, and it stemmed back, it went back, I think, to at least probably over 8,000 years ago. I would say maybe 8,500 years ago or more. And it's probably one of the oldest Middle Eastern civilizations on the entire planet. You're talking about the city that was really one of the bases for these beings. The Ubaid area would have been known to the Sumerians and to the Anunnaki as the city of Eridu. Eridu was one of these beings' bases, their actual main cities. So in the modern day, we would this would be around the southern, or maybe the south-central, southeastern portion of the country known as Iraq, right near the Tigris and Euphrates River, in what was known in the ancient world as Mesopotamia, which means the land between rivers. So you can see the motif here again of decidedly non-human-like looking entities with extremely elongated skulls and large slanted eyes, okay? and some of them holding what looks to be young ones or a child of some kind. Some speculate that this may have been what was known as the mother of humanity, one of the female beings from which the human species was actually derived. So, we talked about the genetic manipulation of humanity and how it paralleled the biblical story of Adam and Eve, and one of the female creatures that was essentially manipulated to bring forth humanity was the being known as Ninmah, that formed the original female primitive worker of the early Mark I type humans, which was the Adamu and Tiamat species. So this Ninmah creature that was one of the original Anunnaki or non-human entities may be being depicted here in these archaeological figurines. So some of the other figures that we see coming forth from the same area of the world are depicted in slide number 57, juxtaposing them with some of these WOEIH figures. And they clearly look both non-human and having some sort of protective gear around them that looks like very similar to what we might call an astronaut's gear. Okay? A spacesuit, if you will. And this has, of course, been looked at very closely by people who take up the ancient aliens hypothesis, and I think there is certainly something to it. I don't really think that these beings would have just, these ancient peoples would have just depicted this out of their imaginations. I think that they were trying to bring to life through art something that they saw in their everyday world and that they didn't understand, and that they wanted to essentially capture in whatever form that they could, and in this case it was through clay sculpture. So one of the other ways that we have evidence to support the actual physical existence of these beings is literal archaeological fossil or bone evidence. Okay, you see in slide number 58 and then moving forward a huge amount of imagery of skulls that are anomalous, and there's a lot of speculation and a lot of conjecture and a lot of debate about these skulls, because people will insist that these are cradle boarded, and we'll talk about what that is in a moment. But I just wanted to put a good smattering of them in the presentation, so I collected them from a bunch of different websites and a bunch of different pictures from museums and archaeological digs where they have been found. And you could see them, these images go from slide number 58 through slide number, let's see if I can get to the end of it, 68. Okay, so 58 through 68, that's 11 slides. Okay, so you could see a lot of different variations when you look at them. You'll see slide 61 is certainly an anomalous one, where the eye sockets are much different. The parietal plates are quite different. This was an entire intact skeleton of a child. You'll see, and people could take their time looking through them. I'm just going to basically talk about this phenomenon of elongated skulls. You could see some of them have hair still attached to them, so there's been some genetic testing done with some of these, and many of them come back with very mixed genetic results, showing that there is some human DNA in them, but there's also some anomalous DNA. And again, this would fit in with the theory that that these were a hybrid species, that they had human DNA in them because they were a byproduct of human and alien beings that essentially put forward the Nephilim, or these giants, as their progeny. And you could just look at the differences in jaw sizes. okay, from a normal human being, and where the jaw muscles would have connected to the head, completely different and larger than a human. And not only that, the skull casings are larger in cubic volume than a normal human being's. If you were to do some type of cranial deformation, which we're going to talk about, you wouldn't see differences in cubic volume of the cubic centimeter of the volume of the brain. You would just see a deformation in the actual skull casing, in the material of the skull, and that would keep the basic volume of the skull intact in a human being. It would not make a larger skull by volume. So if you look at something like image number 66, this skull is at least has a 30% higher skull capacity, the actual brain case capacity, than a human being. That's not possible with cradle boarding, no matter how extreme the cradle boarding is done. You see one of the largest examples, two of the largest examples on slides 67 and 68. Again, peruse these at your own leisure, and download them. You could download the zip file. You'll have all of the images. Again, this is going to be podcast number 162, so you could find the images with that podcast if you're not listening live. And, in Peru, this is one of the largest skulls in their museums down there in 67. And it has a lot of the hair still on it. And a lot of these were depicted as, or were actually found with red hair, or like a dark, rich, auburn, reddish, deep reddish hair, which is very interesting, since most of the people from the areas that these skulls are found don't have red hair. The people who have descended from those geographical regions. So if you go to image 68, here's a depiction of a human skull alongside one of these skulls to highlight the clear differences. Clearly a larger jaw, clearly a larger area where the jaw muscles attach to the head, a huge sloping forehead. And you'll notice that there's only one parietal plate, and it may be difficult to see on this image, but we'll look at it from a different angle in some of the upcoming slides. That's one of the clear things with these. You could really see that depicted on image number 65, where there's only one parietal plate. Human beings have two parietal plates. Almost all human beings have two parietal plates. We'll pick this up on the other side of the break, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll talk about cradle boarding and parietal plates. We'll be right back.
There's a code of silence that we don't dare speak. There's a wall between us in a river so deep. We keep pretending that there's nothing wrong. There's a code of silence and it can't go on.
Welcome back, everyone. This is What on Earth is Happening. I'm your host, Mark Passio. My website, whatonearthishappening.com. We were talking about the findings of elongated skulls in many different parts of the world, and how this archaeological evidence is pretty much completely suppressed and ignored by mainstream archaeology and anthropology because they can't explain it. And a lot of pseudo-scientific conjecture comes back that this is cradle boarding. And all I can say is anybody that thinks that this is an example of cradle boarding doesn't understand the phenomenon of cradle boarding. And we could just briefly, in image 68, look at the difference between a regular human skull and one of these, what I would call Nephilim skulls, or simply a non-human or human-alien hybrid skull. The bone composition in many of these skulls is different. Not only that, but there's a larger brain capacity, often by 30% or upwards. Okay, and that can't happen with cradle boarding. Also, there's usually one parietal plate. Now, there's 4 plates that are basically in the human skull. You have the frontal plate, which is the forehead, okay? And then you have the 2 parietal plates, which is the side of the heads, which join up through seams, at probably around the middle of the head going upward, okay? And then they join at the top and back of the skull, and then you have the very back plate of the skull, which is called the occipital plate. So those 4 plates basically make up the seams of the human skull. On these skulls, you don't see 2 parietal plates, which human beings have. You see 1 parietal plate completely fused together with no seam. And you could see this on many of the slides. If we just go back briefly, you could see that there's only 1 parietal plate on slide 58, on slide 59, on slide 60, on slide 62, on slide 64, on slide 65, on slide 66, 67 is difficult to tell because of the hair, and on slide 68. All 1 parietal plate, whereas a human being has 2 parietal plates. Okay? And you could see that very clearly you'll be able to see that very clearly when we get to image number 70 in particular. But let me just go back to this phenomenon of cradle boarding. We're on slide number 69 here. It's a type of skull binding that leads to cranial deformation, the deformation of the skull. And cradle boarding can indeed account for some elongated skull findings. I'm not saying that all elongated skulls are not cradle boarded skulls. Some are. But many of these skulls that I'm talking about appear to be genuinely anomalous and having just 1 parietal plate, and often possessing a heart-shaped dome in the rear of the skull that cannot be achieved through cradle boarding. These types of phenomena are often completely ignored when anthropologists and archaeologists try to ascribe this entire phenomenon to cradle boarding. Okay? So, cradle boarding cannot explain it all. It can explain some anomalous elongated skulls, but not the ones that I'm talking about here in these slides. On slide number 70, it should all become pretty clear to people when you see the difference between a normal human skull, a cradle-boarded skull, and then a couple of different variations of these truly anomalous hybrid, what I'm going to call hybrid skulls. Okay, image number A on slide 70 is the depiction of a normal human skull when looked at from the top, with the forehead placed down. Okay, so the back of the head is at the top. You see the occipital plates at the rear, at the top of the image. Okay, and then you see the 2 parietal plates joining with the occipital plates and having a seam straight down the middle of the top of the head. Okay, and then they both join with the frontal plate, the forehead bone. Okay. That's a normal human skull and the normal human suture arrangement. The sutures are the seams between the plates. Okay, that's what they're called. Image number letter B on this slide, slide 70, is a cradle-boarded human skull. And there we see it's essentially compressing the back of the head, deforming the skull, okay, not drastically changing the volume of the head. If it were tapered toward the top and pressed backward, you would see a tapering effect, as you see with the child on image number 69. And you see clearly there is still 2 parietal plates, okay, and the occipital plates are basically really smashed, flattened, okay, but they still join up with the 2 parietal plates, which then join with the frontal plate at the lower portion of the image. It's in the same basic orientation as image A, seen as, a little bit slightly from directly overhead, slightly less than directly overhead. Image C is one of these anomalous skulls, and image D. Image C, clearly a more adult variation of this skull, or one of these beings who is clearly fully grown, I guess. Image D, more likely than not, would probably be a younger variant of one of these beings. But you see there are no separation, no suturing in between. There isn't 2 parietal plates. It's 1 parietal plate that goes all the way around and joins with the frontal plate. So this is something that is not just a random defect in a small amount of humanity. This is something that is not really found in human skulls. This is definitely another species from us, or some kind of a species that shares human characteristics, human traits, perhaps human DNA, human genetics, but it also has something else. And a larger brain is one of the things that it certainly would have possessed, because there is way more brain capacity within the capacity of that brain case in that skull than in a normal human skull. Like I said, in many of the cases, it was a 30% or larger difference. So you're talking about a not insignificant difference in the brain volume. So this is one of the main features that cannot be explained by cradle boarding, and archaeologists and anthropologists simply ignore this. These skulls are taken out of any public display. They're not talked about. They're often relegated to complete obscurity in the basements or locked rooms of anthropological museums or in universities, because archaeologists and anthropologists don't want to try to attempt to explain what this is about. They have no answers for it. It doesn't fit into their paradigm of science, okay? It doesn't fit in to their linear storyline of history that they want to get people to believe in and buy into. And they have no formal explanation for it. And without really looking into a lot of these ancient stories of involvement with non-human beings on this planet in our ancient past, I don't think they're going to be able to explain it. And they don't want to touch that with a 20-foot pole because of the implications that it brings forward. So having seen the actual archaeological evidence of these skulls that exist in all over the world, I mean, they're found from the Near East to the Indus Valley to North America to South America to Central America, okay? All over the world, essentially. And no matter where they're found, they're repressed, they're, dug up and reburied, essentially. I don't mean in the ground, but they're reburied in the vaults of archaeological and anthropological museums, institutions, and universities. We'll pick up some of these implications on the other side of this break. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening. I'm your host, Mark Passio. My website, whatonearthishappening.com. In light of some of these findings of elongated skulls that we were talking about in the last segment, we can go back and take a look at some of the depictions by our early human beings of the quote-unquote gods that they shared the earth with thousands of years ago. And image number 71, again, we go back to this Babylonian image of one of the fish gods in their culture, and you see the elongated head. Over and over again, you see the theme of the elongated head, often covered by a huge headdress of some kind. In image number 72, a Sumerian relief of what was presumably the god Enki, okay? And there he is seated on a throne of some kind, again, on a huge elongated headdress, a conical shaped headdress as well. An Assyrian or Akkadian image in the next slide of a winged god, image number 73. once again with that elongated headdress on, covering what would presumably be an extremely elongated skull that these beings actually had as the hybrids or demigod creatures that were the go-betweens between humans and the original quote-unquote gods. The Egyptian culture had these types of headdresses as well. In image number 74, I believe that is Nefertiti, the wife of Akhenaten, if I'm not mistaken. And that is, again, depicting the huge elongated headdress, of these beings that were considered gods or intercessors between the gods and human beings in the Egyptian culture. Again, you see the reliefs of the ancient Egyptians depicting Akhenaten and his family as these beings with extremely elongated skulls and almond-shaped type eyes, as well as their children having these types of skulls. Whenever you see humans, average humans of their culture depicted, they don't have these types of elongated skulls. They're depicted as normal. Okay, but you have these hugely elongated skulls in the beings of the pharaohs and his family, depicted here with, of course, the Aten, the solar disk reaching down with the ankhs of life, presumably representing the extremely long lifespan that some of these beings had. Hence, they were gifted with the life, which is what the ankh represents. That's image 75. Moving to image 76, another depiction of the original founder of the city of Eridu, or Enkidu as it has been known in the Sumerian culture. And there's Enki, the god of humanity, the creator of humanity. And there's the elongated headdress once again, always depicted with the hugely elongated headdress. Once again, what's under the headdress? Why would they be wearing hugely elongated headdresses? For what? If they didn't have huge skull casings, what would they be depicted for repeatedly? And perhaps this was to cover. It was made into a type of a ceremonial headdress, so it would cover the actual differences in the look between these beings and the average human, so that humans would just think, hey, their lower face looks like ours does, but this is maybe just a huge headdress and it's ceremonial, but was it really covering their hugely elongated skulls? Because they didn't really look anything like us. I would probably choose Occam's razor on that and say yes, they were actually covering up the actual skull of these beings, and they weren't just ceremonial, because they wanted to look as human as possible, which gave them more tactical advantage to rule over the human beings. Because if the humans recognized them as completely different from them over time, as they came to integrate themselves into human society and rule through the agreement of the humans, there would be no outward rebellion against something that is clearly non-human. Hence, they chose to conceal themselves in this way and forbid their true countenance from being portrayed. And again, that was a crime punishable by death. Another Egyptian image in slide number 78, another variation on Akhenaten's image, again with the almond-shaped eyes and the extremely elongated headdress. Egyptian royal women in a stele on slide number 79, again depicted, not wearing a headdress. Now here you have, again, where you have more blending into what may have been an actual depiction of how these beings looked. And you'll see the body types as well. Very slim, very elongated arms, very you'll see Akhenaten often depicted like this as well, with the protruding belly, the almond-shaped eyes, the huge ears, the huge elongated head, the head slanted back with that sloping forehead like we see on the elongated skulls. I mean, you just put that skull right underneath this image on slide number 79. It's a direct fit. I mean, I don't know how anybody could see the two things and not think that they're identical, Clearly, the Egyptians were depicting here, doing something that was probably completely forbidden, and depicting a couple of these, quote, royal beings as they actually looked. All right, and you could then look at slide number 80 and just, look at the complete similarity. there. This is a bust of, I believe this is a bust of Nefertiti, Akhenaten's wife. And you could see here depicted without the headdress. No ceremonial headdress on, just depicting the skull as probably it actually looked. Again, with that huge sloping forehead and the huge brain case. And then for comparison, I put in slide 81 one of these actual uncovered skulls, these found skulls after thousands of years, with that bust in the Egyptian Museum of Nefertiti. And, you know, once again, if people can't see the similarity, I don't really know what to tell them. And again, this isn't cradle boarding. I mean, the idea that this is cradle boarding just is hogwash, period. And it's been shot down with clear scientific evidence that cradle boarding cannot produce this type of an anomaly in the human skull time and time again. And yet people want to just cry out cradle boarding. It's like swamp gas, you know, with UFOs. Oh, it's swamp gas, ball lightning, you know. I mean, it's just ridiculous as an explanation. It's a complete logical fallacy, illogical explanation that does not fit and does not hold any water. And it's been proven to be such. As being physically impossible, no tapering of the skull, one parietal plate on the real skulls, whereas cradle boarding always has two parietal plates that are then, you know, joined by the very deformed occipital plates. This is not an example of cradle boarding, you know, period. No matter who wants to say that it is. And there will be people who are diehards who will just insist because they can't envision any alternative. Well, it has to be that. We don't reason from the actual evidence and look at where the evidence leads. We reason by what are we comfortable accepting, you know? And since we are not comfortable accepting any other alternative possibility, then it can't possibly be any of those things. It can't possibly be that. And since cradle boarding is the only thing I'm comfortable with, well, then that's an explanation I'm willing to put out there and ignore all others. Again, it's child's reasoning, and it's fearful reasoning. It's total fear-filled attempt at reasoning. It's not reason at all. It's a fear-filled justification. You know, that's all it is. Looking for an excuse to see things the way you want to see them. We'll pick this story up on the other side of this break. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to What on Earth is Happening. Stay with us.
We don't need no thought control. No dark sarcasm in the classroom. Teacher, leave them kids alone.
Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening. I'm your host, Mark Passio. We're continuing to go through the cosmic abandonment presentation in its extended format. This is all about the connection of the interference theory of human origins to the current human condition. And in the section that we're in, we are basically asking the question, in light of extraterrestrial involvement with human origins, what are some of the seemingly hard to explain or inexplicable aspects of our modern culture that can actually be explained more readily now that we understand what happened in the ancient past? And, you know, we talked about that the whole origin of our culture comes from the early interactions with these non-human entities and the systems that they gave to us, and we're going to be getting into more of that in a little while. How they gave us religion, how they gave us the monetary system, how they gave us the concept of authority or government or the divine right to rule, so that we could be more easily controlled, and they could set up some humans or demigods, the hybrid, alien human hybrids that they had created through interbreeding with their creation, the early human beings, so that they could basically put some of them in a position of so-called power as administrators or intercessors or intermediaries between themselves and us. And that's where all these institutions really came from. We briefly discussed, and we'll get into it a little bit more, the genetic defects of our species, how we have over 4,000 genetic anomalies in our genome, and tons of different genetic conditions that derive from that, not least of which is primary psychopathy. Now, we could get into the ancient technologies that were witnessed by these beings and the structures that many of them left behind that we still can't duplicate today by any technology that we have available to us. If we move on to slide number 82, we see that the ancients often depicted some of the technologies that they witnessed. And again, these are given ridiculous explanations by conventional archaeologists and anthropologists, and insist that they show nothing special, or it's just some religious iconography, just some religious symbolism by primitive people. The Egyptians, here on the left-hand side of this image at two different places, I believe one is at Dendera and one is at Abydos, depicting technologies that the quote-unquote gods had used and implemented. And then the Sumerians in their cylinder seals, very small scrolls that would be rolled out onto clay, where the images were inscribed in them in verse, and then they would press an image down into clay, and then they were baked and hardened and would preserve as a written or a pictographic account what the ancients had ascribed into those seals. So I'll start on the right-hand side. Actually, you see the Sumerians showing their fish god, and their god with the elongated headdress. Perhaps that is one of the priest-class demigods on the right, interceding on behalf of human beings to the gods, depicted as the fish creatures, with their tree of life, the DNA, the expanded DNA tree, so to speak. Okay, always depicted as the genetic experimentations always were depicted as a tree, like we depict it as a ladder-like spiral. They depicted it as a tree that was symmetrical on both sides, and that represented the base pairs, of the DNA strand. And you see the winged disc above them, which was representative of their place of origin, which they called An, which meant the heavens. And this is one of the boats which they traversed the heavens with. And then you see some of their beings in the boat of the heavens, in the upper portion of that image. On the left-hand side, you see some of the technology depicted at Dendera, Egypt, in the upper portion, some type of electrical gathering, or perhaps some type of a capacitance machine that is storing energy, depicted by the serpent. And on the bottom, you have representations of different craft from the ancient world at Abydos. And there's a whole lot of debate about this, that these were two different royal cartouches interposed on top of each other. One of them left up there, and then when the new kingship reign came in, they decided for some reason not to take down the plating of the old cartouche, the old facade, and instead just carved right on top of it. It's probably the most ridiculous explanation that I've ever heard given for anything that has ever come out of ancient Egypt. And there's some doozies, like that the pyramids are tombs, and this one even tops that by a long shot. Because at the holiest place, the holiest center of the entire Egyptian mystery tradition religion, Abydos, what they would have considered the holy of holies in the Cometian tradition, there is zero chance, not 1%, not 0.5%, not 0.1%, not 0.01%. There is zero chance that the ancient builders would have done work that shoddy, sloppy, and careless to leave a facade in place with an old cartouche and just say, let's put the template right over top of it and just chisel it out. Forget it. Would not have ever been done. Isn't done anywhere else. But we're to believe this is done in this one place. Okay? Like it's graffiti or something. They decided to come in here and say, oh, the old king's cartouche is here, we have to put the new one over top of it. But you wouldn't try to fill that in first, or you wouldn't try to take down that old facade and then put something new up there and then carve into it. No. It was done right over top of it. And they say this just magically made these depictions looking like different technological craft. It's such a stretch to try to explain something that they clearly don't want to attempt to explain. Which is, why is there depictions of seemingly modern type technologies at a 2,300-year-old site? Or older, possibly. I'm maybe even getting that too recent. It might be 2300 BC, possibly. I'm not sure of the date, but it's certainly thousands of years old. And, they expect people to just believe that the ancient builders at the holiest place of Egypt, at Abydos, would have just carved over top of something and left the old thing in place. It's an absurdity. And it would not have been done, period. Okay, so I don't buy that explanation. I think it's a shoddy and a shameless attempt to just come forward with whatever ridiculous explanation the public will buy. You know what I liken it to? I liken it to the Doug and Dave hypothesis of the crop formation phenomenon. Two old drunk guys stumbling out of an English pub with some board and some twine made all of the crop circles in Europe, that happened there, the hundreds that happened there, and that explains the entire phenomenon. No matter how complex they were, no matter what country they were in, no matter how many came down on the same day, these guys somehow were there and did them all. And the U.S. media puts out this ridiculous story, and then all interest in the crop formation phenomenon dries up overnight, because that's how easy people will buy a completely half-hearted explanation if it comes from quote-unquote official channels, official sources. Oh, the news said it, and if it's on TV, it's got to be the truth. Why would the newscasters lie to us? Yeah, okay. And, this is the same thing we see. Oh, these are just some random carvings from some part of some arcane, obscure religious ceremonial rituals that these primitive beings had in mind. It's all symbolic. It's all allegorical. There's nothing real to it. There's nothing there. Move along. Don't worry about what happened in your ancient past. Now, you're not slave races created by beings that you can't even comprehend. Nothing to see here. We'll pick this up on the other side of the break, folks. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening. We'll be right back.
The day destroys the night, night divides the day. Try to run, try to hide, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side, yeah.
Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening. We're going through some anomalous things in the cosmic abandonment presentation that modern humans are still at a loss to explain. Like how structures that we still cannot duplicate with modern technological advances could come to be placed in such perfect precision alignment with such tremendous building precision to a point where some of the blocks you cannot literally put a human hair in between them. They are fitted so closely together as if the stone were melted into place. You have the type of construction like we see at the Great Pyramids on the Giza Plateau that still cannot be reduplicated to this day. I mean, there are people who have claimed that they could do it, and not with the precision that these things are laid to at the heights at which they reach. You know, like 530 feet, and you're talking about the apex is something like one quarter of an inch in alignment with the base. You know, it's such insane precision. We couldn't do that with modern cranes. We couldn't do that with modern cutting tools. And yet these ancients allegedly only armed with bronze tools. Yeah, bronze cutting tools, bronze saws, bronze hammers, etc. Cut through some of the hardest granite stones in the world to make these blocks, granite and limestone blocks. You know, materials which are often 6 times as hard as the tools that they allegedly had at their disposal. I mean, you go to places in Egypt, you see clear signs of machining, you know, clear signs of absolute machining technology. And they want to say, oh, no, that's not machining. No. They carved it as a motif to look like some huge saw or machine was cutting it, some huge circular cutting tool. Yeah. You know, I mean, it's like people who will just spit right in your face and say, I didn't do that. You know, that's literally what it's like. And they expect somehow to be respected or not have people loathe them for talking down at people like that, expecting them to buy into the nonsense that they're trying to sell. I mean, they literally think people really are that naive. You know, some of the blocks in the structure of the pyramids at Giza, like the Great Pyramid, are in excess of 50 tons. You know, and they're raised to like a height of several hundred feet. What technology existed back then? We could probably barely do that with cranes that we have today. The foundation stones of the Great Pyramid upon which it sits, some of them are estimated to be 400 tons. And they weren't quarried there. They came from like miles and miles and miles away. No explanation of how they could have transported things that heavy. We would have a difficult time doing that over that type of terrain today. And we could go on and on about the pyramid alone. I mean, my intention isn't here to make this whole thing about the Great Pyramids and their absolutely remarkable construction. You know, you could do 10 shows, 100 shows on that. So I just want to just mention that as one example, and I'm going to give many. I mean, you look at Stonehenge on the southern English plains in England, and some of the stones there are in excess of 50 tons. And they were mined from, like, Wales, you know, which is probably over 100 miles from where they sit, or more. Probably more than that. And we're to be, you know, expected that, you know, the ancients with copper tools in, you know, Neolithic times, lacking copper tools at that time, you know, somehow rolled these over, you know, completely treacherous rolling hill type terrain, blocks that were 50 tons, bringing them from 100 miles to erect them for seemingly just religious purposes, you know, on the southern English plain in the middle of nowhere. These buildings had to do with energetic purposes, ladies and gentlemen. It had to do with technologies that were not built by humans. This is Nephilim technology, or even possibly Anunnaki technology, but certainly at least demigod technology. You go into all these cultures like the Incas of Peru, you know, where Machu Picchu was at, depicted here in slide 85. And, you know, they were rich in gold. And when a lot of the Spaniards that came over here at the behest of the royalty of Europe and conquered these peoples, asked them, well, where'd you get all this gold? They always said the same thing. The gold was the gods' possession, and they were keeping it for the gods, for when the gods returned. And we'll get into this whole dynamic of gold. I want to spend some time on that because, there's so many unanswered questions when it comes to gold. It's a topic I've been really looking heavily into in recent weeks, myself, in my own research, looking into monatomics and things like that, and Ormes, and we'll get into all of that. But, these people were out in the open saying, we didn't mine this gold. The gods did this. We mined it for the gods. They wanted it. They found some kind of a precious intrinsic quality to it, intrinsic value to it. Not us. We were just keeping it for them. And the gods instituted that gold as money to be used in methods of exchange and arbitration between their early slaves. That's where the whole system of money came from, people. Nobody wants to talk about that. They want to say, "Oh, money just came up." It came up in the Middle Ages and in the Crusades, yeah, because it was just all about metalsmiths that basically turned their vaults into gold reserve banks for people that didn't want to carry it, and then they then started lending out paper slips as credit slips so that people wouldn't have to carry all that gold around, and then found that they always had more on deposit, could lend out more slips, and rake in money because people would never take their gold out simultaneously, unless there was some kind of a run on their bank. And that instituted the modern day institution of fractional reserve lending. Yeah, well, maybe that may be so, but that doesn't explain where the entire concept of it, the intrinsic value of money in gold came from, or where people started even using gold, or why they started using gold. What was this perceived intrinsic value? Again, we're going to get to all of those questions. I want to go back to, some of these absolutely amazing places that, there's no good explanation for why these places were built or how they were built. Machu Picchu is up thousands of feet on the side of a mountain. And these stones didn't come from there. They weren't quarried there. They were brought there. Why and how did they get them up to these levels? Some of them in excess of 40 tons. Then you have right near Machu Picchu in Peru, you have, in slide number 86, this is the city of Sacsayhuaman. Sacsayhuaman is like this huge temple complex. You see there a child standing next to one of the walls to show the size of the walls of this complex. I'm sorry, I think Sacsayhuaman is in Bolivia, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. I might be wrong about that. It's either in Bolivia or Peru. I know it's in South America somewhere. But these walls, some of the blocks in this wall weigh in excess of 200 tons. 200-ton block, and you could just look at the construction. This is, now right here, what we're looking at here in slide 86 at Sacsayhuaman is Nephilim construction. This is demigod construction, and it is Peru, if I'm not mistaken, okay? I'm thinking of, which we're going to get to, I'm thinking of Pumapunku, which is in Bolivia, which is one of the last slides in this section about ancient construction. But Sacsayhuaman is in Peru, and it's near Machu Picchu, and it has blocks in it that are irregularly shaped, made with such precision construction that you could not go up to one of these stones with a butter knife and insert a butter knife between them. A credit card couldn't be put between them. Okay, you could not insert a chisel, a very thin chisel in between these stones. That's how precisely together they are fit in this totally irregular construction. This is Nephilim architecture. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back, everyone. We're into the third and final hour of the show for this evening. As promised, I'm going to be taking your calls this hour. The call-in number to join us, toll-free, 800-313-9443. Once again, to join us here on What on Earth is Happening, you could ask questions, you can make comments, you could talk about anything that we've already covered. You could get into the topic that we are covering right now, which is ancient human origins, interference theory, how that connects with the current human condition. The call-in number, 800-313-9443. Let's go to the phones. We have waiting on the line Ivan from Phoenix. Ivan, welcome back again to What on Earth is Happening. Great to hear from you. How are you doing?
All right, Mark, and you? You hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, how are you doing?
Doing well.
All right. Let me see. As always, I have a bunch of stuff, but I'm just going to try and keep it to the topic of tonight. Synchronistically, over the past week or so, I've been watching and listening to some other programs and shows, and they've also touched on like Zachariah Sitchin's work and Anunnaki and stuff like that. And a question was brought up that pretty much put things in perspective. It raised a question that I don't think anyone's really brought up. If supposedly God was our creator and we were made by this all-knowing, omnipotent, perfect being, why is it that women have a painful, cramping menstrual cycle, messy kind of monthly thing? You know, that sounds like something that some scientific or technically advanced beings would tamper with, but not know how to, perfect.
Right. That's one aspect. Another that we could also look at, aside from just the menstrual cycle itself, is the process of birthing. Why is it so painful? Why seemingly does a human baby take so much more effort for a woman to give birth to than other animals? Other animals don't have that much difficulty in the birthing process, nor do other animals have to care for their young for such a long period after birth as a human being. I don't think there's any animal that the childhood period of the animal till it can actually be on its own and take care of itself on its own is, as long as a human being childhood. So these are complete anomalies when it comes to human beings that don't exist really in any other animals on our planet. So, it calls to question: are these all kinds of genetic codes or characteristics or traits that were deliberately programmed into the human genome by these beings?
Right. I just came from watching that Dawn of the Planet of the Apes.
Oh yeah, I had heard that there was some pretty decent themes in this movie. It's something I plan on seeing. I haven't seen yet, but you can go right ahead and give us your take on it.
Oh yeah, like I always say, I think I'm your media consultant. I'm always talking about movies on here.
No, that's great, yeah, because these movies often do have powerful allegorical underpinnings if we can be conscious enough to recognize them as such and not just see them as a science fiction movie or a cool action flick. There's often really powerful allegorical themes that underlie them. So, yeah, I could definitely see you as the media consultant to the What on Earth is Happening show,
Yeah, definitely. I've been noticing it in a lot of different TV shows and movies and programs that, over the last few years, my consciousness has broadened so much that I can pick up all these little hints and allegories that normally would go unnoticed. And yeah, this new Planet of the Apes film had at least 3 or 4 topics or themes or parts in it that stood out for me that were very subtle in a way. If you're not looking for them or aware of them, you just see it right in the story and not pay any attention to it. But gun control is addressed in there. the I know I can't use profanity on here, but you always have the jerk, whether it's an ape or a human.
Right.
It only takes one person to mess everything up.
Right.
And then the few people to follow in doing the wrong thing.
Tell me a little bit more when you say gun control theme. In what context is that? At the risk of spoilers, I mean,
Well, basically, the guns are manufactured by humans,
Mm-hmm.
so humans have power. But once apes get their hands on guns, then apes have power. See,
Right.
so that kind of shows, well, why are we in the situation we are right now? Because governments have more of the guns worldwide, whereas here in the U.S., since the civilians have guns, things aren't going exactly as they would like it to be. So that's hinted at the movie. He who has the guns can pretty much call the shots.
And so many people don't understand that dynamic, Ivan. It's a shame how many people don't understand what the Second Amendment was for. They don't grasp the importance that if you cannot defend your physical vehicle, your physical body that carries your consciousness, it isn't about being violent. It isn't about, allegedly drawing to you what you don't want, which is some kind of a violent confrontation. It's about knowing how to stand within your rights. And if weapons exist, and weapons do exist, unfortunately, okay, hey, if we were in a world where weapons didn't exist, we wouldn't even have to discuss this. But since they have been made and they exist here, okay, and some people have them, okay, until you completely do away with them all, which again, I don't even think can be done or should be done, because, and I'll get to this is actually an interesting side point. I went back and listened to the show that I did on the recent interview, or semi-recent interview I did on the Kate of Gaia show, and listening to some of the people who were completely anti-gun on that show, and I realized that a lot of the people who think like that are so far off the mark when it comes to understanding real spirituality. And I listened to the job that I did on that, and I was fairly well impressed with how I presented the case for self-defense on that show. If people haven't heard it, you can go and listen in the news archives. But so many people in other countries in particular are so ignorant of what gun ownership rights are really about as defense against a tyrannical state. And I've, done whole shows on the Second Amendment and how important it is. Not that I'm any constitutionalist by any stretch of the imagination. I'm an anarchist completely and don't believe in any form of government. But the Second Amendment's reason for being put in place is admirable when it comes to why the Founding Fathers did that. And it was clearly as a way to have the people have a distributed mechanism for defending their rights against a government that became too powerful. And that's where the word militia, which is the only entity that is said in the entire Constitution and Bill of Rights to be necessary. It's the only part of the entire dynamic of the people and the government that is said to be actually required and necessary. They don't say the president is necessary in the Constitution. They don't say the Supreme Court is necessary. They don't say the Congress is necessary. They say that the militia is necessary. The only entity in the entire document that is labeled necessary in the entire Constitution and Bill of Rights. And they say for a reason it's necessary. It is a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state. Meaning, if you want freedom to continue to manifest, the militia has to be present. Once you give up that right, you're in a state of enslavement. And what is the militia? It comes from the Latin militium vulgarum, which I've explained on this show a few times, that it means military strength present everywhere throughout the people is what that actually means. The phrase militium vulgarum in Latin, which is where militia comes from, means military strength present everywhere.
Wake up!
Welcome back. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening here on RBN. I'm your host, Mark Passio. We're taking your calls in this hour. The call-in number to join us, 800-313-9443. We're talking to Ivan from Phoenix right now, who brought up some of the themes in the recent Planet of the Apes movie. I intend to go check it out for its allegorical content. I really like the first one, and I'm sure that this one will be no exception. He was talking about some gun control concepts brought up in it, but for probably a positive purpose that, if these apes as some kind of a developing or burgeoning species were not able to hold guns, they would easily be defeated and conquered by people who wanted to keep them down and keep them back and keep them suppressed. And if they had the guns and the apes did not, then they would not be able to basically defend themselves. And that brought me to the concept of the Second Amendment and the militia, the role of the militia, as the only thing that is spoken about in the Constitution that is necessary. And it comes from the term, again, people have to go back to the meaning and original origin of words and understand militia came from a Latin phrase, militium vulgarum, which meant the full force of military strength, but present in a way that is distributed throughout the whole population. Therefore, at any time, if any entity, whether internal or external to the country, were posing a threat to freedom, the people would be able to rise up with arms that were commensurate in strength to a military force and put down that threat. That is literally what the militia was designed and intended to be for, and it is not a governmental agency. The founders repeatedly told people in their own writings and in public speaking engagements that the militia was the entire people. Hence the phrase militium vulgarum, vulgarum meaning the common people or present throughout. Literally, the origin of the word in Latin means that it is present or distributed everywhere throughout. Okay, so that's what that term actually meant. So, Ivan, great to hear that was actually rolled in there in what you would consider to be a positive spin on gun ownership then.
Yeah, in a way, yeah.
Okay.
Because there's a lot more that happens in there. But
okay. What other themes did you think were allegorical that it brought up?
Well, this one I don't want to give away much of the plot, but I did notice this in a TV show I was watching a few weeks ago. This is a show, 24, comes on Mondays, and about 2-3 weeks ago, something happened on 24 that kind of relates to what happens in this film.
Okay.
And it deals with a concept that I had in my head the weekend that aired on 24, synchronistically enough. And this is the idea, or the observation I made, and this covers a whole bunch of areas and connects a lot of dots. I've kind of come to the conclusion that the reason evil is so dominant right now is because it knows that good, or the goodness in people, it's become its enabler. There's been too much forgiveness, too much kindness,
right?
Too much giving second, third chances.
Tolerance for evil. That's what we have developed as so-called good people. We have developed tolerance for the presence of evil, which there should never be any.
Right, and that goes along with the New Age movement of now focusing on the negative and all this stuff, so evil knows it can get away with it.
That's right.
Now, what I noticed and the observation that I made is, I described it like the good people or goodness needs to start tightening its belt. It has to come to the point where you messed up once, that's it. Okay, the next time, done. No second chances.
Right.
That's it. Whatever needs to be done, it needs to be eliminated. That's it. And that's what I'm noticing in some of these shows, that the person does something, they kill whatever, 200-300 people, something happens on a TV show, whatever. They don't, the hero doesn't take them to court and serve the justice system and wait for it. No. Boom, they just take them out. And in a way, the way this world is right now, I see no problem with that. Because that's the law, that's like natural law. Right there, it's like, you got that person standing in front of a boulder thinking, I can stop this boulder, and the boulder is going to be like, well, this poor person. No, natural law is going to run it over.
Right.
Like you mentioned with gravity in your seminar with that little girl. Gravity's not going to be like, oh, no, that's the problem right now, right and wrong. People are letting too much wrong go, continue.
Unchallenged.
Yeah, unchecked.
Yes.
And it's like, no, this is wrong. You did wrong. That's it. It needs to be stopped, and that will start curbing evil and start, giving that side. Like, wait a minute, good is starting to really stand up for itself. Maybe we need to back off, and then you start coming back into balance. If that makes any kind of sense.
Sure. Absolutely, and that's going to take a lot of courage for people to step into that role with the level of tyrannical government that exists in this country and throughout the world, unfortunately. That's no small task. That's no small order. That's going to take a radical restructuring of the way people think, and it's going to take an enormous amount of courage and willpower to summon that will to do that. And I don't know whether it's there right now. I don't know if it is there at this point. I'm not saying we couldn't get to that point of summoning that kind of courage and willpower, but it's going to take a radically different way of thinking about the difference between right and wrong. And so many people are trapped in moral relativism. It's sad,
Yeah, in a way, you touched on this the last episode when you mentioned psychopathy,
right,
or the psychopath.
Yep.
How you said something about you don't reside in that area of psychopathy, but you can access it when
turn it
necessary.
on. That's right. I'm going to do a show or a small mini presentation at one point called, or I don't know if it'll be called this, but it'll have this theme contained within it: having the psychopath. Not bowing down to the psychopath, not being owned by the psychopath, not being ruled by the psychopath, but owning the psychopath yourself, having that within your toolbox, within your capability to bring out and bring forward and use if required and necessary under certain circumstances, and then put back into the toolbox when no longer required. I think the fact that most people cannot conceive of the mindset of a psychopath and cannot access the psychopathic characteristics or tendency within themselves to actually have that as part of their own psychological tool set is a problem. And most people will hear that and think, oh, that's a weird thing to say. It's like not being able to put yourself in the mindset of a psychopath is what allows a psychopath to do what they're doing unchallenged and unchecked, because people can't even conceive of it. We need to be able to envision the mind of a psychopath. I would go one step further. I would say good people actually need to have a certain small subset of psychopathic capability within them to turn on when emotions aren't called for or required to do a certain task, to defend oneself or defend one's family or defend one's rights from an oncoming attack, and to use that turning off of emotion to one's benefit. And again, this theme is very well addressed in the Equilibrium movie. Again, it's a movie I highly recommend people to see for its allegorical themes. And this is one of the things that the leader of the resistance attempts to explain to the main character in that film. It's a great scene. But I think, again, I said last week, I think it goes a little too far when it comes to a negative view of human nature, whereas my view of human nature is simply that it was created as something that is programmable through information, and it is neither good, inherently angelic, nor inherently demonic or bad. So,
right.
Hold on through the next break. I'll let you continue this on the other side, and then I'll take some more calls. But Ivan, great points that you're bringing up. Thanks so much, ladies and gentlemen. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
There's nothing wrong. There's a code of silence, and it can't go on.
Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening. We're taking your calls for the remainder of the show. Call-in number to join us, 800-313-9443. We're still talking to Ivan in Phoenix. Ivan, we were talking about, psychopathy as something that has to remain in measure within a person to be able to defend oneself against evil forces. I don't think that means becoming the psychopath, but it means using the ability to turn off emotion as a tool set in one's psychological arsenal so that you could deal with a threat that doesn't care about what it's doing to you. So great point that you brought up there. And what else did you have for us?
Well, just to round off that comment,
sure,
that just takes it back to what you were always been, talking about, the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine.
That's right.
That's just the enactment of the sacred masculine. It's not, getting all crazy and abusive and violent. It's using whatever necessary force to achieve whatever defense or correct any wrong that's being done. So you can't do that with, flowers and, kisses. Sometimes you just, sometimes you gotta do the opposite.
Right.
So,
and
like
sometimes you
fight fire with fire.
And sometimes you can do it through consciousness and talking and changing people's minds. But when that is refused and you know that you're dealing with a psychopathic personality that is dangerous, at that point, it may have to go into the physical domain. And we have to understand we always maintain that right to physically defend ourselves when our rights are coming under attack by someone who will not stand down. So great point. And that is about the sacred masculine and exercising that right within us to defend ourselves and our rights. So
and you just brought to mind that goes from ISIS to Eris.
That's right. From the point where you could learn by the truth or you could learn by the school of hard knocks, so to speak. Yep.
Okay, real quick, so we can get other callers in.
Sure.
I just had 3 quick things. Check out the movie Pleasantville.
Okay.
I threw that on recently. It's an old film from like 1997, and very good with the allegories. It almost had me in tears. Just the stuff with consciousness, awakening, change, how black and white world, someone brings in new ideas, concepts, and everything becomes color with change. It's very interesting, very well done.
Cool.
And then that's Pleasantville. And in theaters, there's a documentary out right now called America, Imagine a World Without Her. You need to really have your trivium in place to see this one because it really messes with your head to, paint America as all pretty and everything. I mean, they use some truth showing the bad things that have happened in history, but then they try and come about and justify it and make everything look pretty, and you're kind of left, well, maybe it isn't that bad, and you got to kind of, no, wait, I need to, keep truth and logic and process the information because it's very, very good propaganda, but yet it's good. It's a good documentary. It's based on a book by Dinesh D'Souza, the guy who did that Obama 2016 Obama's America.
Wow.
And then real quick, wrapping things up, I received 2 emails, and now I'm kind of like, you're trickling through me, Mark, because what you did for me, I'm doing for others. I received an email from someone thanking me and all this kind of stuff, and that they enjoy when I'm on calling to your show, and they have a blog post and everything. So this gentleman, I think his name is Joe Bellucci, and then I received another email, and I think I sent you the link to this. This individual, Scott, out of Florida, he created a website called areyoufuelforevil.com.
I've seen this site, yes.
Fits into what we were talking about.
Right. Oh, absolutely. How people support the system that's enslaving them. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So
I've seen the site, and it's a good job. He's doing a good job with that. Yeah.
Yep. Anyway, so that was it then.
Great. Ivan, thanks so much. Always great to hear from you, and always great insights that you bring up when you come onto the show. So thanks so much. And just as an aside to Ivan's call regarding allegories in film, I'd like to recommend Snowpiercer. That's a recent one that I've just seen that was all about the control system and how the people basically are afraid to step outside of it because of what might be required to do just that. And it's a really pretty powerful film about hierarchy and control and, people being in their place and revolution. Very interesting allegorical themes in it. I think people should definitely check it out. Let's go to some other callers. Let's hear from Robert in Missouri. Robert, you're live on What on Earth is Happening. Welcome.
Hey, Mark, I've talked to you a couple times. Right when you were coming on the network, I talked to you when you were on with John Stadtmiller.
Yes.
Psychopathy, there's so much of it in these Abrahamic faiths. The two main branches of Islam, Kabbalistic, Talmudic Judaism, and especially Roman Catholicism, but even evangelical Protestantism. We see these people in Gaza being massacred right now by the Israelis. These rabbis, they dehumanize these Palestinians.
Right.
And this is this tactic that I see constantly repeating itself, that the people that want to do evil, they first have to dehumanize those that they want to do evil against. And you see this play out in the Talmud, especially with, the overturning of the Ten Commandments themselves by the people that brought us the Ten Commandments by their little rationalization,
right,
like thou shalt not steal.
Right.
Well, what it really means is we can't steal from each other as Jews, but the rest of humanity, they're not human, so we can steal all we want from them. Thou shalt not kill or murder.
I think you see
Same thing.
I think you see this line of reasoning in just about every extremist form of religion. As people see themselves as part of one group and separate from everybody else, it's an easy jump to make a rationalization that everybody else that is not us is there to be controlled by us because we're better than them, or we're somehow in a privileged position. It doesn't even make a difference what group it is. It could be, again, any extremist religious group, any political party, any ethnicity or national identity. It happens through all different avenues. And, this is separatist thinking overall. And it's the thinking that's gotten us into the mess that we're in. And yes, very often what happens is people in a psychopathic state or a psychopathic personality will gravitate toward institutions like this and toward the highest levels of the institutions, because through belief systems they could do the greatest amount of damage. That's how they can worm their way into society through an institutional body to do the greatest amount of damage, which is what they're really looking to do. These are people that are just bent on destruction and bent on putting other people under their thumb, or putting other people down, or making other people as miserable inside as them because they're incapable of feeling. And so you see this time and again in all different cultures and all different extremist religious traditions. This is how psychopaths operate in the world. That's what they do. They find areas to be able to put wedges in between people and essentially control them from those positions, those institutionalized positions that people who don't want to think flock to invariably, because this person's going to tell me how it really is. This person's going to tell me, how I should live. This person's going to give me a set of laws or a set of, guidelines to conduct my life by. But never do these people want to actually understand natural law and get outside of groupthink, and say, it's my responsibility to truly understand the difference between right and wrong behavior, not because it was told to me by some set of commands, not because this person and their institutional body says that this is how it is, but because I know the actual difference between right and wrong in my own mind and in my own heart. God forbid anything but that. We can't have that, because that requires real thinking. That requires true personal responsibility. And that's the last thing the people of this world want,
Yeah, and what's really fascinating is, like, with Islam, you've got the House of Faith and you've got everybody else, where it's even codified in the text.
Sure.
where it says to slay unbelievers wherever you find them, and then so forth. Then you get into Roman Catholicism, where they use the word heretic, and then they burn heretics,
infidels, heretics, the profane. You see it in even mystery tradition teachings where you have the profane. We are the elect and they are the profane. It degenerated into that even in so-called enlightened teachings in many respects. It's the same separatist mentality that we see time and time again throughout the ages. People can't seem to understand we are actually one family in the same circumstance, in the same position. We're all in this together, and that's the level of consciousness that we need to get to if we're going to get out of this mess. So, Robert, great point that you bring up. We'll pick this up on the other side. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. Welcome back, everyone. Final segment of What on Earth is Happening for this evening's show. The call-in number to join us, 800-313-9443. Once again, toll-free, 800-313-9443. I want to thank Robert from Missouri for his great insights in the last segment, and let's move on to Curtis from Florida. Curtis, you are live on What on Earth is Happening. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's an honor to speak with you. I looked at your website and I watched 2 of your 3 1-hour or more videos explaining your spiritual ideas. I respect you and I like everything I saw. I remember you had one episode on there about how evil is always stealing. Either killing is stealing a life, or raping is stealing sex, or stealing someone's property is stealing. But the evil is pretty much the same action.
Yes.
Stealing. And I wanted to ask you, if you say you're an anarchist, and I'm not being a jerk, I'm sincerely asking.
Sure.
I'm not asking making a case for whether there should be a government or not, but whether there should be private property. Where do we get the right to draw a fence on God's green earth and say, this Grand Canyon, Niagara Falls, this beachfront, or this 10,000 acres? Now, I believe in private property, but only reciprocally, like Henry George. I get a 40 acres a mule only if you get 40 acres a mule. It's not an auction, like you shouldn't have to buy your left kidney or your air, your sun, your rain, or your land. Land is from God. We each should own an equal share on your 18th birthday. That's my belief. So as an anarchist, are you a rover anarchist, like you can go anywhere, or are you a private property anarchist? And can you make that argument? Because I made it reciprocally.
Well, I definitely believe in private property. I think that property is... I defined property in my natural law seminar talking about what is ownership. It is having rightful possession, meaning you did not harm someone to acquire that thing. It is maintaining the usage of that thing. So you are actually using it. In other words, somebody can't claim all this property and they're not actually putting it to use or using it. Something is your property if you're actually using it. If you try to claim more than you can use, that's an illegitimate claim on property. So, there's so many people today that claim all of this land and stuff and things as their property. It's like when they couldn't possibly be using all of that. And really what they're doing is keeping it from other people. It's like corporations claiming that all this water, all the water that exists in a whole country is their property, or all the salt that exists in a whole country is their property. That's not a legitimate claim to property. Property means it's like I always go back to the line from the Lord's Prayer about give us this day our daily bread. It doesn't say give us for the rest of eternity all the bread that we could ever eat and then some more. It's saying what you can use in the immediate sense. That's what property is about. Again, I go to objects around me. Why is this hard drive my property? I'm using it. I access data on it every single day. That's the reason it's my property. And I'm in rightful possession of it. And the third part of property or rightful ownership is that we are responsible for it. So it's something that I have to be able to maintain responsibility for, like my body, like the things that I own in my home, like my home itself or my car or whatever, or the weaponry I may own. I maintain responsibility for what happens with that stuff. So those are the three defining hallmarks of true property. It's rightful possession, it's maintenance of usage in a way that is legitimate, not in a way that keeps back needs from other people, and it is claiming and owning full responsibility for that thing. So that's the way I see lawful property under natural law. There is such a thing as property, however. It's not like all private property should go away. That would be something that would be a forced non-natural thing. People think property is not something that is natural. And in every way, property is actually something that exists in nature, in the natural world, because I have a need for something and I am putting something to use. So if I have a need for the storage of information, for the propagation of information, such as a hard drive or a computer, that is my rightful property. I am using it, and nobody can claim that they can just come and take that thing from me because perhaps they want that thing. Well, if they can acquire another one and get one and have one for themselves, that would be rightfully their property because they would be putting their information on it. It's the same when it comes to land. It's the same when it comes to anything that we can put a claim on of ownership while we are using it in the physical body. And again, there's no such thing as eternal ownership. I get that. People want to turn this into a semantical argument about that you're going to die one day, so how could you ever really own anything? I tell people it's about stewardship while you are in the physical vehicle. I am living on the land that I'm living on now. It's my property because I'm living on it. The reason is because I'm here. The whole concept of I got there first. It's not an imaginary thing. That's a legitimate thing. If somebody's there, you don't have a right to just put them off of that land. And again, that's why there's so much karmic debt on the very country that we're even living in, because there were already people living on this land and we put them off of it when our ancestors came here. I shouldn't even say we, when our ancestors came here. And I think those karmic stains or debts are actually coming down into the modern day as a result of what this country has become, or through what this country has become. So my overall answer to your question is yes, there is such a thing as legitimate property. I do cover it in a little bit of depth in my natural law seminar. I recommend watching that in its entirety. And look to those three aspects of property. Again, rightful ownership, not having harmed someone to acquire it. The maintenance of the actual usage of that thing for what you need, not for keeping people back from what they need as a result of holding it, and the maintenance of personal responsibility over that thing or that piece of land or whatever we're talking about as being owned. So those are my definitions for private property.
Well, Mark, I like it. I got it. Maintenance, usage, and
responsibility.
Gained without hurting others.
Yes.
The problem is there's so many people in a country, any country, except maybe like Saudi Arabia, it's mostly desert, or Australia. There's so many people that there should be, in my opinion, there should be a square. In other words, a squaring system to a kitty or a pool. Each person on their 18th birthday, in my opinion, deserves an equal share of air, rain, sun, land, and their left kidney. And you shouldn't have to bid on these things. You shouldn't have to be the most intelligent, or you shouldn't have to be an auctioneer to have freedom of speech.
Right.
You shouldn't have to be, charismatic personality to have freedom of association.
Sure.
And you shouldn't have to have money to have land. God made land.
Yes.
And therefore, any ownership of it is an extremely tenuous claim. And it's not like you got a reed and turned it into a flute, or you got a conch shell and turned it into a trumpet.
When so few people own so much land and claim everybody else doesn't have the right to own any of it because we're saying we already own all of it. That's the situation we really have now, where 1% of human beings own 95% of the land on the earth.
That's like aristocracy. It's an evil system,
Right.
Mark.
That I can agree with. That I don't believe it. That's not legitimate claim to property. Legitimate claim to property is I have this area that I put to use for my own needs and requirements for daily living, and that's legitimate ownership of property. And nobody should be denied that because other people claim that they own it all. I agree with that.
I agree, Mark. But I like you. I don't want to be so corrective, but instead of saying you have to use it, because if I had 20 acres, I may not want to have to go on every acre every day. But what I am saying is reciprocity. There ought to be a way that each person let's just say it was on average 40 acres a mule. Let's just use that because it's already in our lexicon, it's already in our verbiage. If you want 41 acres, you should pay. And if you have 39 acres, you should receive. I believe in a kitty, and it's called a 9 square. And the 9 square net excluders, a natural inheritance, net excluders, super quotient land rent.
Interesting. Curtis, we're going to have to pick this up at another time because unfortunately we're out of time for this edition. Ladies and gentlemen, hope you've enjoyed tonight's show. That's all the time we have for tonight. We'll see you right here next week. And remember, there's only 2 mistakes one can ever make on the path to truth: not starting and not going all the way. Take good care.